Germany woke up in 1919 as a nation without a spine. The old empire was gone, swept away not by a final decisive battle, but by exhaustion, hunger, and fear of revolution. In its place stood the Weimar Republic, a democracy born not from victory or popular demand, but from collapse. That origin mattered more than anyone realized at the time. From its very first day, the new government was associated not with hope, but with surrender. The men who led this republic signed documents, not dreams. They believed democracy could stabilize Germany, but they underestimated how deeply the war had poisoned the public mind. Millions of Germans did not see Weimar as a fresh start. They saw it as the face of humiliation. The Republic carried the burden of Versailles on its shoulders, and every reparation payment, every foreign demand, every economic failure was blamed on it. Behind the scenes, the Republic was fighting enemies on all sides. On the far left, communists, inspired by the Russian Revolution, attempted to seize power. Armed uprisings broke out in cities like Berlin and Hamburg. Workers took over factories. Red flags replaced national ones. Too many Germans. This felt like the nation was being torn apart from within. On the far right, nationalist malicious former soldiers who refused to accept defeat organized themselves into paramilitary groups. They called themselves patriots. They wore uniforms, carried weapons, and spoke openly about overthrowing the government. These men did not fear violence. They had lived inside it for 4 years. Peace felt unnatural to them. Here was another uncomfortable truth. The Weimar Republic survived only by making deals with people who hated it. To crush communist revolts, the government relied on right-wing militia. To maintain order, it tolerated men who openly dreamed of ending democracy. In protecting itself, the Republic strengthened the very forces that would one day destroy it. Every political assassination chipped away at stability. Ministers were shot in the streets. Judges looked the other way when right-wing extremists were involved. While harshly punishing leftists, justice itself began to feel political. Faith and fairness vanished. Meanwhile, ordinary life became a daily struggle. Factories closed as foreign markets disappeared. Veterans begged on sidewalks, their medals rusting in their hands. Families skipped meals. Mothers diluted soup to make it last longer. Fathers stood in unemployment lines that never seemed to move. Pride turned into quiet shame. The Republic tried to comply with the Treaty of Versailles, hoping obedience would earn trust. Instead, it earned contempt. Payments were never enough. Concessions were never sufficient. Germany learned a brutal lesson. Weakness invites pressure, not mercy. This realization changed the national mood. Anger was no longer just emotional, it became ideological. Newspapers accused the government of cowardice. Political speeches blamed democracy for chaos. The idea that Germany needed a strong hand began to sound appealing to people who had lost everything. Another rarely mentioned detail. Many Germans experienced democracy for the first time during crisis. They did not associate it with prosperity or freedom, but with hunger, inflation, and disorder. That association would prove fatal. In beer halls, train stations, and overcrowded apartments, people talked about restoring order. They did not agree on methods, but they agreed on one thing: the current system was failing, and failure breeds radical solutions. Internationally, Germany stood alone. It was excluded from major alliances, watched closely by its neighbors, and treated as a permanent suspect. Even attempts at reconciliation were met with skepticism. This isolation reinforced the belief that Germany could rely only on itself. The Republic's leaders were exhausted. They governed through compromised, emergency laws, and fragile coalitions that collapsed as quickly as they formed. Each election felt less like democracy and more like a gamble. And through all of this, the myth of betrayal continued to spread. The idea that Germany had not truly lost the war but had been sabotaged from within became a powerful narrative. It offered something invaluable: an explanation that preserved pride. Instead of accepting defeat, people could believe they had been robbed of victory. That belief was comforting and dangerous. What made this period so explosive was not just suffering, but directionless suffering. People knew they were angry, but they did not yet know who would harness that anger. They were waiting for someone to connect the dots, to name enemies, to promise restoration. The Republic offered complexity. The people wanted certainty. By the early 1920s, Germany was not simply unstable. It was primed. Every institution was weakened. Every belief was questioned. Every crisis reinforced the sense that the nation had lost its way. Democracy was standing on broken ground, surrounded by forces that despised it, sustained by people who had stopped believing. The world watched Germany struggle and assumed it would eventually normalize. What it failed to see was that normalization was no longer the goal. Germany was not looking for balance. It was looking for redemption. And in times like these, redemption rarely comes quietly. The pressure on the Weimar Republic did not ease with time. It tightened like a noose. By 1920, Germany was living in a constant state of emergency. Governments rose and fell in months, sometimes weeks. Coalition partners argued more than they governed. Laws were passed only to be undone by the next crisis. To ordinary citizens, it felt as if no one was truly in control. Authority existed on paper, not in spirit. This instability created a dangerous contradiction. Germans were exhausted by chaos, yet surrounded by it. They wanted order, but every attempt to impose it seemed to fail. The Republic spoke the language of compromise, while the streets spoke the language of force. The army, officially limited by the Treaty of Versailles, remained a state within a state. Secretly, officers maintained illegal training programs. Weapons were hidden. Military doctrines were preserved in coded manuals. Germany was forbidden to prepare for war, but it never truly stopped preparing for the idea of one. This quiet defiance became a source of pride among nationalists. It reinforced the belief that Germany was temporarily restrained, not permanently defeated. Another hidden fracture ran through German society. Resentment between generations. Older Germans blamed the young for radicalism. Younger Germans blamed their elders for leading the nation into disaster. Veterans felt betrayed by civilians who had not shared the trenches. Civilians felt threatened by veterans who seemed addicted to violence. Trust between groups eroded until everyone felt surrounded by enemies. Fear became normal. Fear of communism. Fear of starvation. Fear of foreign invasion. Fear of internal collapse. When fear becomes routine, people stop asking whether solutions are moral. They ask only whether they are effective. This is where extremist movements began to grow, not because they were reasonable, but because they were confident. They offered simple answers to complex pain. They named villains. They promised restoration of pride. Most importantly, they spoke with certainty in a world drowning in doubt. The Republic tried to defend itself with laws, but laws mean little when belief disappears. Emergency powers became common. The Constitution allowed the president to rule by decree in times of crisis. These powers were meant as a safeguard. Instead, they became a habit. Each decree weakened democracy a little more, teaching the public that bypassing parliament was acceptable when things got difficult. Democracy was slowly training people to live without it. Foreign occupation deepened the wound. When Germany fell behind on reparation payments, French and Belgian troops marched into the Ruhr, the industrial heart of the nation. Coal mines and factories were seized. German workers were ordered to cooperate or face punishment. To Germans, this felt like invasion under another name. The government responded with passive resistance, encouraging workers to strike while still paying them. To cover costs, it printed even more money. Inflation, already dangerous, turned catastrophic. By now, anger was no longer abstract. It was personal. Parents watched children grow weak from hunger. Professionals watched decades of work vanish in days. Pensioners became beggars. The social contract collapsed. People stopped believing effort led to reward. Survival became the only goal. One of the darkest secrets of this era is how close Germany came to complete breakdown. There were moments when the Republic could have fallen entirely not to one movement, but to chaos itself. Regional governments ignored Berlin. Paramilitary groups acted independently. The state's monopoly on violence was slipping. Yet the Republic survived not because it was strong, but because its enemies were divided. Communists wanted revolution. Nationalists wanted restoration. Conservatives wanted order. None trusted the others enough to seize full control. This temporary balance of hostility kept the Republic alive. but only barely. Internationally, sympathy existed, but it was shallow. Some foreign leaders recognized that Germany was being pushed too far. Others feared easing pressure would allow German power to return. As a result, policy swung between punishment and half-hearted reform. Consistency was absent. Germany interpreted this not as caution, but as manipulation. Every compromise felt temporary. Every agreement felt conditional. Nothing felt final. The most important transformation during this period was psychological. Germany stopped seeing itself as part of a shared European future. It began to see itself as isolated, misunderstood, and uniquely wronged. This mindset is dangerous because it turns grievance into identity. People no longer asked, "How do we rebuild?" They asked, "Who made us suffer?" Once that question dominates a society, it becomes easy to redirect anger toward chosen enemies. Political language grew harsher. Accusations replaced debate. Loyalty was measured not by actions, but by enemies. The Republic still held elections. Newspapers still printed freely, but beneath these democratic rituals, belief was eroding. Democracy had become a structure without faith. What made this phase so critical was not that Germany had failed, but that it believed it had been deliberately broken. That belief justified anything that followed. By the mid-1920s, Germany stood at a crossroads. One path led toward painful reform, reconciliation, and patience. The other led toward defiance, revenge, and radical transformation. The Republic hoped time would heal wounds. History rarely does. Germany was learning that humiliation does not fade quietly. It reorganizes. It searches for meaning. And when it finds a voice willing to turn pain into power, it listens. The ground beneath the Republic was no longer just broken. It was waiting to collapse.